I'd like to share with you one of my favorite Christmas stories, Auntie Claus. It's by Elise Primavera. And I discovered this book when I was at one of my son's book fairs when he was in elementary school. And he's now 28 years old. So I've had this book a long time. But it's still one of my favorite books because the illustrations are fabulous and the story is so wonderful. Auntie Claus by Elise Primavera. The Kringle family lived high atop the luxurious Bing Cherry Hotel in New York City. And they loved Christmas. They kept a Christmas tree up year-round, and Mr. Kringle was the president of the renowned Jingle Bell Company. And Mrs. Kringle owned the fabulous Mistletoe to Nail Salon over on 56th and 5th. They had even named their young son after you know who. Sophie and her little brother had everything, but if you asked if it was enough, no, they would say. Was it enough to have their own private soda fountain? No. They would shake their heads back and forth and clothes and books galore, and no, they would scream. It had been suggested by their great aunt, Auntie Claus, that maybe Sophie and her little brother were given too many presents. You can never have too many presents, sniffed Sophie. That's my motto. Yes, everyone in the Kringle family loved Christmas, but no one loved it more than Auntie Claus. Auntie Claus lived at the Bing as well, penthouse 25C, darling. Every afternoon, Sophie was summoned there for tea. Each day, Auntie Claus would instruct Sophie on the different topics. One day it might be Christmas trees. Always pick a nice full one, darling, with springy needles. Another day, it might be decorating. You must drape the garlands, darling. One strand at a time, you must never throw it. After they finished with tea, Auntie Claus would close with these words of wisdom. And darling, always remember, you must remember the first and final rule. Whether it's birthdays, Christmas, Halloween, it is far better to give than to receive. Sophie wondered about her great aunt a lot. She was mysterioso, Sophie thought. And this was true. There were many strange going on up in penthouse 25C. Most people considered Auntie Claus just another eccentric New Yorker. But Sophie knew that there was more to her than met the eye. For instance, what was that diamond key she always kept around on a silver ribbon around her neck? Just a bit of costume jewelry, darling, her great aunt would say, then quickly change the subject. Why did Auntie Claus leave every year right after Halloween and not in return until Valentine's Day? Just the business, darling. And she changed the subject again. Where did she go? Sophie wanted to know. Once again, it was Halloween, and Auntie Claus announced, in 1 week, I'm off to my annual business trip. What kind of business are you in anyway? Sophie asked. That, darling, is something for me to know and you to find out. And that was exactly what Sophie intended to do. This year I have a plan I'll stow away. Sophie had made up her mind. As she was leaving, Sophie said, I'm going on a business trip with Auntie Claus. Marvelous, darling. Be home in time with Christmas. Be there. There's a good girl, her mother said. Do take your mittens, said her father. I want to go too, screamed her little brother. Oh, no, you're not, says Sophie. Can if I want to, he said. Cannot, she said. Can too. Cannot. Sophie could hear the ear-splitting screams start to fade as she ran out the door. Sophie tiptoed into Auntie Claus's apartment. There were many, many boxes and trunks waiting to go. Choosing the largest one, Sophie pushed aside the drapes and furs and wiggled inside. Quickly, she made a little peephole in the cardboard so that she could see everything that was going on. Auntie Claus entered the room. She removed the diamond key that hung around the ribbon on her neck, and next she placed the key in the lock of the old elevator in her apartment. The door slid open, boxes and trunks were loaded, and the door slid closed. The elevator shot up into the air and out into space. They were going up, 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 up. An hour passed, and still they were going up and up and up. Sophie could feel it getting colder and colder. From her peephole, she could see stars zipping by. And was that snow? We can't possibly be in New York any longer, she thought. I went backwards. How confusing. It must be how Sophie felt. The elevator landed with a thunk, tipping over Sophie's box. She could no longer see, but she thought she heard cheers. She climbed out of the box, and the sound soon faded, and all became completely silent. She, thinking it was safe, she climbed out of the box. Where am I? She asked. You must be the new elf, the little man said. That's it, Sophie. I'm the new elf. Who are you? I'm Mr. Puddin'. Oh dear, you're in violation of elf rule number 3. What do you mean? He pulled a worn green and red book from his pocket. On the cover it read, Elf Rules and Vital Information. He pointed to the section in dress code. Sophie read aloud, always look neat, always look snappy. A well-dressed elf is always happy. Well, follow me, he said, and he trotted off into the darkness. Where are we going? Hurry, said Mr. Puddin' over his shoulder. Only 48 days left. Mr. Puddin' put Sophie right to work in the mailroom. It seemed to her a good place as any to begin her search. Where was Auntie Claus? And what was she doing here? For days, Sophie lived among the elves and did her best to blend in. She slept on a cot in the elf dormitory. She ate her meals in the cafeteria. No one suspected. Every day, Mr. Puddin' appeared. Hello, Elf Sophie. Settling in? The uniforms are itchy, the hours are long. This is hard work. Oh dear, said Mr. Puddin'. He pulled out the old green and red book again. Elf rule number 2, Mr. Puddin' recited. An elf's work is never done, but hard work never hurt anyone. Rules schmules, thought Sophie. For weeks, Sophie looked high and low for Auntie Claus. But now it was almost Christmas Eve, and she had turned up nothing. Sophie was worried. If she didn't find Auntie Claus, she would see. How would she get home? If she didn't get home, how will I get my Christmas presents, she thought. Just then, Mr. Puddin' appeared. Hello, Elf Sophie. Good news. You have excelled in the mailroom and may proceed to package wrapping. After that, we'll all pitch in and pack the sleigh. I'm not going to package wrapping and I'm not going to sleigh packing. I want to go home, Sophie yelled. I have to get all my... And before she could finish, Santa's voice interrupted on the PA system. It's that time of year again, his voice boomed, and I was hoping one of you would volunteer to go to the coal mines and pick up the BB&G list. Sophie whispered to Mr. Puddin, "What's the BB&G list?" "What's the BB&G list?" he shivered. "Ooh, it's the short for Bad Boys and Girls list. And boys or girls on that list go without presents or worse for Christmas." Sophie swallowed hard. Uh-oh, she thought. Mr. Puddin continued, "Only the bravest elf would volunteer for such an awful, awful job." Yes, a brave elf, thought Sophie. Or else a girl who thinks she might be on that list. She raised her hand. "I'll go," she said. Oh dear, Mr. Puddin said. As Sophie made her way toward the coal mines, she could hear the chanting of the BB&G elves. "Spoiled brats and cry babies, whiny babies, and all the ones that don't believe. Here's some coal and here's some gunk. Fill a stocking that smells like skunk." Ooh. Sophie went down, 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 where it became darker and darker and darker. Finally, she reached the very bottom, and there was the list. Sophie looked for her name, but it wasn't there. She wasn't on the list. It was, my own little brat of a brother. Chris is on the Bad Boy and Girls list? Well, she thought, once she's gotten past the shock of it, they do kind of have a point. But then she pictured the two of them on Christmas morning. There would be lots of presents for her and nothing for her little brother. On his favorite day of the year, Chris would find only a stinky stocking filled with coal and gunk. Ugh. He will be so disappointed. He'll be so sad. She quickly erased her name, but now there was a large telltale gap. There was only one thing to do. Sophie took a deep breath and she wrote her name in his spot. The ink wasn't even dry on the page when some kind of really strong magic happened. Right before her eyes, the list, the BB&G elves, and the coal mines vanished. And Sophie was whirling around and hurling through the air in a blur of Christmas red and green and snow and, was she up, was she down? She couldn't figure out at all. The next thing Sophie knew, she was standing on the stage in the grand ballroom. A clock struck midnight. Santa began to speak. "She's always on time. She works harder than anyone I know, including me. In short, she does things right, and I would be lost without her. Let's have a big round of applause for my sister." And the curtain opened. "Auntie Claus!" Sophie screamed. "Auntie Claus!" Everyone cheered. "Hooray for Auntie Claus!" Turning to Sophie, Auntie Claus winked and said, "Come along, darling. You must be home in time for Christmas." Sophie was a little bit confused. And Sophie was about to climb in the sleigh when Mr. Puddin appeared. He was wearing his green and red elf book, waving his green and red book in the air. Oh dear, Auntie Claus, Sophie can't leave until she knows the first and final rule. See, it says so right here under departing procedures. The reindeer stomped restlessly and shook their heads as if to say, "Let's go, let's go, let's go!" "Sophie knows the first and final rule, Mr. Puddin," Auntie Claus said. "I do? Yes, you do, darling. Now hop up on the sleigh. There's a good girl." Sophie jumped into the sleigh and rose up into the sky. "Goodbye, goodbye," she called. She could barely hear her aunt's voice over the wind and the snow. "I knew you had it in you, darling. Merry Christmas, sweetheart." The sleigh picked up speed. "Ho, ho, ho, ho," Santa laughed, and the stars whizzed by. Sophie closed her eyes. Her face was really, really cold. The next thing Sophie did was she opened her eyes. She could barely believe it. She was in her own bed again. She ran down the stairs toward the living room. "Please let him have presents. Please, please, please let him have presents," she said to herself. Under the tree was her little pudgy brother. His cheeks were red, his eyes sparkled, and his belly shook when he laughed. "Merry Christmas, Sophie! Merry Christmas, Chris!" she said with great relief. It was then that she realized that Auntie Claus was right. She really did know the first and final rule. It's far better to give than to receive. "There is something here for you," her mother said farther in. She handed Sophie a tiny box with a card. Inside was a diamond key hanging from a red ribbon. "It's from Auntie Claus," Sophie said. "Here it is." "Where is Auntie Claus anyway?" Chris piped up. "On a business trip, darling," Sophie said and smiled mysteriously. Suddenly a thought occurred to Chris. "She's never here for Christmas. What kind of business is that anyway?" "This is something for me to know and you to find out, little brother." And someday he would, but that's another story. Merry Christmas.